a jury found a Tyler man guilty on charges including forgery, money laundering, and theft. 64-year-old John Russell Hobbs was indicted and arrested in 2022. As KLTV7's Lauren Tier reports, only one witness took the stand today before the jury deliberated.
On day 3 of the trial of John Russell Hobbs, the prosecution called its final witness to the stand. Captain Jeff Roberts currently works for the Texas Financial Crimes Intelligence Center, but was a financial crimes detective for Tyler PD when he was first involved with this case.
The initial case was brought to us by the FBI. I got a phone call just basically saying, hey, we have what appears to be a good criminal case here, some pretty large sums of money being moved.
Roberts' testimony included statements saying the victims didn't know some of the BP and Exxon stock was sold or even existed. A big red flag that had investigators following the money from Betty Jo Collins' personal accounts to a joint account and then to Hobbs' account. Roberts did, however, testify he was unable to complete the investigation before moving to his current position. The prosecution rested after Roberts was dismissed, and the defense did not call any witnesses, also resting their case. In closing statements, the state said the case is based around the large sums of money that were moved from account to account, according to their calculations from the bank records.
$859,000 from personal to joint, and then $790,000 ranges from the joint account to the personal business account of John Russell Hobbs.
The defense closed with the argument the state did not call proper experts like a forensic accountant to testify about the bank records.
I would hope as a juror you would demand more. I will tell you that my client is sure entitled to more than that.
After deliberation, the jury found Hobbs guilty on all 3 counts. Lauren Tier, KLTV 7 News.
Sentencing picks back up tomorrow at 9 a.m.